My name is Dennis Wick, and I'm with Interfaith Lake County. And I'd like, first of all, to thank all the people from Interfaith Lake County that helped put this together. It's really appreciated, and if you are a member, please stand up so people will know you and talk to you afterwards. Anyway, thank you so much. We're so excited to have the Readers Theater come down from the villages. And this is a wonderful program. We've seen it before. And it is a creation of the United Church of Christ. And just to tell you a little bit about it, I'd like to introduce the Reverend Drew Willard. But before I do, I also want to thank Reverend Bill Weckerly and his class for joining us. It is going to be so exciting to have someone younger than me here. Drew? I know.
Thank you, Dennis. Actually, the first time I saw this presentation was at Hope Lutheran Church in the Villages. And I found that two of church members, Nancy Bell and Jean McClure Bryan, had done an adaptation of this book and had gotten permission to do a Reader's Theater script. And it's been performed, we think, at least 10 times throughout Florida. And just really feel that this is a compelling story. And just as an overview, it's about three women of three different faiths who got together after 9/11, and they wanted to write a children's book. And well, the story became about their conversations. And we found that to be a very important message, and continues to be for our time. Now, the United Church of Christ at the Villages is sponsoring this evening, and we actually had a grant that we received from our Florida conference in support of the event today. I just want to announce the different characters here. Rania Idlabi is portrayed by Naran Sykes, and Naran is the wife of Imam Abdurrahman Sykes. And in fact, the first time I met them both was at that presentation at Hope Lutheran in 2010. And I understand that is also the very first time this program was presented. Suzanne Oliver is portrayed by Adonica Ani, who is a member of my church. And so we are very proud of her to be involved in this program. Priscilla Warner is portrayed by Phyllis Lowe. And she and her husband, Steve Lowe, who is the narrator, have been involved in the program since the beginning. Well, I'm going to have an opportunity to talk a little bit later about interfaith programs and activities and some of the projects that we have tried, and welcome your conversation. And so glad that the interfaith group here is active and hosting us today. At this time, I turn you over to the program.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you. After September 11th, Rania Idlabi, an American Muslim of Palestinian descent, faced constant questions from her children about Islam, God, and death. They were the only Muslims in their classroom. Inspired by a story about Muhammad, Rania reached out to two other mothers, a Christian and a Jew, to try to understand and answer these questions for her children. After just a few meetings, however, it became clear that the women themselves needed an open and honest environment where they could admit and discuss their concerns, stereotypes, and misunderstandings about one another. After hours of soul-searching about the issues that divided them, Rania, Suzanne, and Priscilla grew close enough to discover and explore what united them. The Faith Club is a memoir of spiritual reflections in 3 voices that will make you feel as if you are eavesdropping on the author's private conversations, provocative discussions, and often controversial opinions and conclusions. They wrestle with the issues of anti-Semitism, prejudice against Muslims, and preconceptions of Christians at a time when fundamentalists dominate the public face of Christianity. As they reveal their deepest beliefs, you will watch the blossoming of a profound interfaith friendship and birth of a new way of relating to others. In the next hour, you will hear bits and pieces of their conversations that lasted for 2 years.
As I watched the second plane hit the World Trade Center, I desperately thought, please don't let this be connected to Islam. The city mourned in churches and temples. I needed a mosque or a Muslim religious leader, an imam, who could help support my family during this horrific time. I needed a spiritual community, a safe haven where we could seek comfort. I did not feel comfortable at the mosque in our neighborhood, where women prayed separately from men. I wanted to be respected. I wanted to enter a mosque on an equal footing with Muslim men, to be treated as an equal, as I know I am in the eyes of God. Soon after this, my daughter came home from school and asked me, "Do we celebrate Hanukkah or Christmas?" "We celebrate a commercial kind of Christmas, but we're Muslim. We don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God. We believe that Jesus is a prophet." How could I give my daughter a clear, educated answer that she could convey and deliver to other kindergartners? Was there such an answer? The terror of September 11 turned my alienation and frustration into anger at those who had invoked Islam to justify such heinous crimes. Wouldn't it be wonderful, I thought, to find a Jewish and Christian mother to write a children's book with me that would highlight the connections within Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
I was an ex-Catholic, happily participating in an Episcopal church in New York City on September 11th. It challenged our perceptions of Islam and Muslims. Who were these people? Why did they hate us? I thought the woman I greeted each morning at the school bus stop, our daughters were in the same kindergarten class. She looked like a stylish blend of Europe and the Middle East to me. I asked her where she was from, and she told me that her parents were Palestinian refugees and that she was born in Kuwait and had grown up in Dubai and in Virginia. When she mentioned to me her idea of bringing together a Muslim, a Jewish, and a Christian mother to write a children's book of miracles, I jumped at the chance. The intent of the book was to educate children about our common heritage. A friend recommended Priscilla, a Jewish woman, for our project. She had 2 sons and experience writing children's books.
Suzanne was looking specifically for a Jewish mother who wrote. I had never defined myself in those terms. I was a writer and a mother, but a Jew? Religion wasn't my field of expertise. I knew a fair amount about my religion. I had attended a somber interfaith service at my suburban Reformed temple on September 12th, where my rabbi and other local clergy tried to make sense of the unfathomable events the day before. But it occurred to me that there was no imam there. I had a persistent fear that New York City would be attacked again. For 35 years, I've suffered from severe panic attacks. But after 9/11, I was thrown into one long, never-ending state of low-grade panic. I pretended to be calm, and I tried to convince myself that New York City was still alive and well. So when Suzanne called me, I was eager to collaborate on a children's book that would bring children hope and bring hope to me.
When Rania opened the door to her home for their first meeting, Priscilla was immediately intrigued. She and Rania shared colored photographs by the same photographer and the same chandeliers in their homes. Priscilla took this to be an unusual omen.
I had never met a Palestinian woman before. Suzanne was less mysterious to me, and Rania was, well, she was Palestinian. I'm not sure how I expected a Palestinian woman to look or act, but I was intrigued by her as a person. She was beautiful, smart, sophisticated, and warm. She was confident, but refreshingly self-deprecating, one of my favorite traits in any person. I felt an immediate connection to her.
My daughter is confused. She knows she is different from the Christian and Jewish children that she is surrounded by. And I feel like it is time for me to educate her and my son about what it is to be a Muslim today.
I've never interacted so intimately with a Muslim woman. I keep thinking as I listen to her speak about her concerns that this is going to be a very interesting meeting. I was in a room with two substantial, intelligent women who felt an urgent need to connect and produce something meaningful out of that connection. Rania told us of her family's history in Palestine, but not as an angry person with a political axe to grind, but as a loving mother with a family and a story to tell. It was as simple as that.
The morning of our first meeting, I was not nervous about meeting a Jewish woman. I had met many Jewish people with an array of political opinions, but I knew Priscilla and I could clash. Palestinians and Israelis were at war. But I'm tied up in my family's displacement nearly half a century ago. As soon as I met Priscilla, her eagerness to connect was evident. She was a Reformed Jew, and in my mind, she represented the great Jewish liberal tradition of debate and free thought. The fact that I was so able to talk to Priscilla and Suzanne so freely served as a sad reminder to me of the lack of debate in Islam today. As Priscilla explained the evolution of Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox branches of Judaism in America today, it occurred to me that Islam needed a parallel experience. When I shared my family story with Priscilla, I felt I was in the presence of someone open to meaningful dialogue.
From the time I discovered Rania was a Muslim, I was intrigued. My knowledge of Islam was meager. I knew Muslims followed the teaching of an Arab called Muhammad, that they worshipped in mosques, and that they had a holy book called the Quran, and that they were obliged to make a pilgrimage to Mecca once in their lifetime. But I held an image of Islam as a violent religion controlled by men, a religion of mistreated women, polygamy, and an eye for an eye justice system. Stories about women being stoned, about the 911 attackers being inspired by the Quran. During my travels in Muslim countries, I had seen women treated as second-class citizens. I had left the Catholic Church to become Episcopalian, in part because Catholics don't allow women to become priests. So I was curious to learn how Rania could reconcile her modern life with Islam. After all, she wasn't fighting a jihad against the West. In retrospect, she was on a jihad, a word I later learned to mean an inner struggle. She was struggling to define her Muslim faith, and she was struggling to have this faith recognized in the West.
The first question each of them asked each other was, what is your religious background?
Well, I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island. My father was from Massachusetts and my mother was from California in Hollywood. Although they were both Jewish, they came from very different backgrounds. My mother claims that her family served spaghetti as a traditional Passover meal. My father's seders lasted hours, while everyone digested the matzah balls my grandmother had slaved over for days. I spent 4 years in a Hebrew day school studying Hebrew, Torah, and Jewish history all morning, and secular subjects like math and history in the afternoon. The whole experience felt serious and no nonsense. I was a good student, learned my prayers, and began praying by myself at home. But when I was in the 7th grade, my father abruptly pulled me out of the Hebrew day school and enrolled me in a Quaker girls' school. While my father was proud to be a Jew, he was a Jew on his own terms. Sometimes he fasted on Yom Kippur, and in other years he didn't. On some Passovers, he ate no bread. Other years, he started the day with an English muffin. As a family, we still went to temple on important Jewish holidays. But at school, I went to chapel every day and sang songs of hymns along with my new blonde friends. In December, our musical assembly included Christmas carols and prayers. I hesitated over the name Jesus, but I sang and appreciated the beauty of the songs. I enjoyed going to a Quaker school. The open-mindedness felt liberating in contrast to my years at the Hebrew day school, which I remembered to be as rigid and small-minded. In college, I socialized with both Christian and Jewish friends, but I dated a WASP from Boston. Growing up Jewish meant growing up with an attachment to Israel. I remember my father boasting of the bravery of the Israeli soldiers during the Six-Day War. I took a trip to Israel with my family when I was 12. We visited cousins of my grandmother in a kibbutz near Galilee. Our trip reinforced my connections as a Jew to Israel, which was stressed at the Hebrew day school. But as I grew older and began to learn about the politics of the Middle East, I became uncomfortable with Israel's policies on the West Bank. I thought it was an unnecessarily provocative act to build settlements in what was formerly Jordan. I told that to Rania and to let her know that I was an enlightened Jew, a Jew who was open-minded to the issues of Palestinian rights.
I am a Muslim woman of Palestinian heritage, and no matter where I've lived, I have always been an outcast. I have struggled with stereotypes others have attributed to Muslim Palestinian women. This has
Priscilla
affected...
had a problem.
Rania, what do I say to people who cite suicide bombers as proof that Islam is a violent religion spread through war?
Nowhere in the Quran does it say kill and you shall be rewarded. Dying in the name of religion is not unique to Islam. There were also Christian martyrs, some of whom are considered saints. We all should recognize that when religion is used as a rationale for aggression, a tactic of war, or to justify a promised land, then it is politicized religion.
And the word jihad is terrifying to most people. What exactly is jihad?
It can mean an inner struggle to be a better Muslim. This is considered the greater, more important jihad. The lesser jihad is the idea of holy war, in defense of the faith, especially when mortal danger is perceived. This jihad against the infidels, like these terrorist attacks, are not only crazy, but a faulty reading of Islam. By Islam's definition, Christians and Jews are people of the book, and therefore not infidels.
Is suicide accepted in Islam?
No, it's considered a sin, as I believe it is in Judaism and in Christianity.
But what about the suicide bombers and the virgins awaiting them after their suicides?
It's ridiculous. I've been a Muslim my whole life, and I've never heard about the virgins in heaven until after 9/11.
We felt guilty interrogating her like this, but if I was going to defend her religion, her Muslim God, I needed some facts.
When they had finished that discussion, the Quran surfaced in an unexpected way.
I have always carried a Quran with me, clutching it as I gave birth to my children.
I don't carry a prayer book.
Oh, I didn't carry a Bible.
So you've always had a connection to the Quran?
Yes, but it wasn't until we began our conversations that I have become bold enough to open it and try and read and interpret it on my own.
How does the Quran inspire you spiritually?
It is very egalitarian and poetic. It strives to be an open book, acceptable to all.
Is it true that you can be a Muslim just by reciting the Shahada and then reading the Quran?
Yes, I think the most important things are the 5 pillars of Islam. They are the Shahada, or the testimony of faith, daily prayer, fasting, zakah, and the pilgrimage. Ultimately, you will be judged on whether you followed these pillars of Islam.
Priscilla, what about the promise of an afterlife? What do you think, without the promise of an afterlife, what do you think makes people want to be good?
Well, I do believe that God is inside all of us.
And God is willing to let that part die, and that is fine?
Well, God goes on to the next. And we are like flowers that bloom, fade, and go back into the earth again. Ashes to ashes, and dust to dust. I take hope in what is written in a Jewish prayer book. When we
The
master...
merits of education as a necessary tool for survival. So in Kuwait and Dubai, when they found the public schools lacking in curriculum and qualified teachers, they sent me to the privately run French lycée in Kuwait and the English school in Dubai. This meant I was one of very few Muslims, if not the only Muslim in my class. I learned my ABCs in French and wrote letters to Cher Papa Noel or Dear Father Christmas during the month of December. In Dubai, I sang Silent Night and Noel at school Christmas concerts, and I danced the color purple in my school's production of Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. My religion was not a required part of the school curriculum, and whatever I learned about Islam was strictly through the customs and traditions of my family. We didn't need a mosque, but we practiced Islam at home through prayer, charity, and traditions. During Ramadan, the holiest month in the Islamic calendar, my parents and grandparents fasted from dawn to sunset. I remember waiting for the sound of the cannon, which signaled the end of the day's fast. During this month, we exercised discipline and attempt to cleanse the body, mind, and soul of bad thoughts. As a child, when I attempted to fast, I was told that I was too young and my growing body needed nourishment. My grandmother advised me to participate in the spirit of the month by meeting different challenges, controlling my temper, or giving a thirsty person a glass of water before I took care of my own thirst. I was told this was a sure way to get to paradise. The highlight of the month was always Eid, the celebration marking the end of Ramadan. We received gifts and allowances and dressed in new clothing from head to toe. Traditions became an integral part of my life. Today, I always carry a Quran in my purse and sometimes wear a verse from the Quran around my neck. I pray, but not necessarily 5 times a day, like more traditional Muslims do. I am reluctant to throw out leftover bread without kissing it and asking God's forgiveness, as a custom reminding Muslims that many people in our world remain hungry. And I still go through our apartment making sure that no shoes remain with their soles facing upward toward God in a sign of disrespect.
My background sounds so dull, and in comparison, it was ordinary, safe, and Midwestern, like Wonder Bread and Hallmark cards. When I was growing up in Kansas City, I never missed a Sunday Mass, or even Masses on the holy days of obligation that don't necessarily fall on Sundays. We went to church together every weekend. As my 4 siblings and I grew older and got involved with sports or jobs and that kept us busy on Sunday mornings, our Mass attendance was still monitored by our parents. And with 3 Catholic churches within an easy drive, there was always a Mass going on somewhere, sometime between 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon and 7 o'clock on Sunday mornings. Prayer was part of our life at home too. We said grace before dinner and we knelt by our beds for nighttime prayers. In my bedroom, I had a plastic statue of the Holy Family on whose base were the words, "The family that prays together stays together." Inside the base was a rosary. The 3 oldest children took turns reading a chapter of the Bible aloud each night after dinner. Once, as I listened to my 8-year-old brother sound out the words like Sadducees, my attention turned to the sound of the freeze tag game next door. I would have given my new AM/FM radio to jump out of my seat and join that fun. I spent 12 years at Catholic schools and went to an overabundance of religious services. Once a week with my class, once with my whole school, and once again with my family on Sundays. I remember one of the priests telling us about saints who suffered stigmata. St. Francis of Assisi's hands and feet bled in exactly the same places that Jesus had bled, he told us. And we learned about people in modern life who had similar bleeding experiences. We wondered Would this ever happen to us? How would we play volleyball? I went to confession about once a month. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned, I would say through the screen dividing the sections of the confessional booth. It has been 1 month since my last confession. In that time, I have been mean to my brothers and sister, disobeyed my parents, and taken Twinkies out of the freezer without permission. For that, I would say 3 Hail Marys, then have a clean white soul again. How lucky to die right after confession, I thought. I would go straight to heaven. In spite of my 12 years in parochial schools, I didn't have much of a theological understanding of Christianity. In the 6th grade, we memorized Jesus' Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. To fulfill my religious credits, I took 2 Eastern religion classes. Now, it strikes me as odd that Islam was not included in either one. I was exposed to Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. In humanities, I learned Greek and Roman mythology. But Islam entered my life peripherally. It came through travel, through books, and through war. Though I attended church infrequently during college, I still considered myself a Catholic. In Rome, I was brought to tears by the tombs of so many Christian, courageous martyrs who died for their faith. And I wept before Michelangelo's Pieta. I thank God for the gift of being raised a Catholic and resolved to be a better one. But the thrill of being 20-something in New York got in the way. And when I had children, I began to focus on my spiritual life in a significant way. My husband and I made the switch from Catholicism to the less rigid Episcopal Church.
Now, Rania, Suzanne, and Priscilla had started out months earlier talking about what Jews believe, what Christians believe, and what Muslims believe. They were like soldiers galloping from their camps, carrying the standards of their people. They had presented those beliefs to each other and examined them to see if they had any of the same markings. But now, it was time to begin talking about the real people underneath. In other words, each of them. So they made a commitment to each other to examine their own beliefs and prejudices and discuss them openly. They would no longer hide behind Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. They each set about writing what they thought was important about their respective religions to be included in the children's book. They brought their writings to their meetings and had many discussions, but the most contentious one was about the crucifixion, because Priscilla had quite a problem with what Suzanne had written about.
You know, Suzanne, this is quite upsetting to me. The stuff you read about the Jews killing Christ.
Jews killing Christ, I never said that.
You calmly read Wicked Hands and Israel. How about reading that again?
Jews as wicked men, I never said that.
Right there, you talk about the men of Israel being the wicked hands who killed Christ. That's what people have called us Jews for centuries. Christ killers.
I've never heard that term before.
I'm not making this up. The point is we've always been blamed for it.
Well, I'll take another look at it.
Why can't you just remove the crucifixion from your story?
I really can't do that, Priscilla.
You can't write this story. It just fuels the fire of anti-Semitism. How can you not know that?
It's a tiny minority. Sensible people today don't hold Jews responsible for Jesus' death 2,000 years ago. I can't believe she is trying to take away from me the most essential part of Christianity because of an insult she perceived and I never intended.
Certainly, Suzanne meant no harm in her story.
After that, Priscilla did a lot of homework, talking to her husband and a friend, and also a rabbi. At the next meeting, she came early to talk to Rania alone.
Rania, every single person I spoke to over the weekend, Jew and non-Jew, has heard the term Christ killer.
That doesn't surprise me.
But Suzanne hadn't heard it, and she made me feel nuts or paranoid. If she can't understand why I had a problem, I don't see how I can continue with this project.
We might not have a project here. Priscilla came with a resignation letter. Just in case.
Priscilla, do you think it was reasonable for you to take what I wrote about the crucifixion so personally?
Well, yeah, it was visceral and emotional.
So what was your reaction based on?
I think all Jews are so sensitive to anti-Semitism because of the Holocaust. You can't underestimate what that means to Jews.
I don't think people underestimate its meaning.
But if it happened once, it can happen again.
Do you really think that?
Look, the world is a different place, but sometimes fear is not rational. It's emotional. Even the Easter service that you described to me, the Passion Play, sounds like the Jews are bloodthirsty. Like they're calling out for Jesus to be nailed to the cross.
Priscilla, the Passion Play is not about you at all. It's not about the Jews.
But when you call out, crucify him, you're playing the part of the bad guys. And P.S., the bad guys were the Jews.
No. The Romans were the ones in power.
Jews have tried for centuries not to rock the boat. After the crucifixion, Christians created what they thought was a better religion. A religion that became hugely popular, leaving Jews in the dust. Then Jesus came along, and we didn't jump on the bandwagon, which in the long run has made our lives as Jews much more difficult.
Before their next meeting, Priscilla had a disturbing conversation with a woman that made her once again feel like an outsider. They discussed extremist religious groups. Soon, they were discussing evangelical Christians and why they support Israel so strongly.
This woman was a Christian and knew someone with strong evangelical beliefs. She said they want the state of Israel to exist because that's where they expect the Messiah will come again. And once the Messiah comes, they believe that all Jews will convert or perish. That's what the religious right isn't saying when they talk about keeping Israel safe. One day they expect there will be no Jews left. I had never heard anyone explain to me exactly what the evangelicals believed about Jews, the Messiah, and end of the world, which even had a name, the Rapture. The story disturbed me. It didn't sound good for the Jews, as my father might have said.
I still wonder what influences in your Jewish background affected your reaction to my retelling of the crucifixion.
I think I'm just wired to be sensitive to any situation in which a Jew feels excluded from the majority. Maybe that's hard to grasp because as a Christian, Suzanne, you're the majority. So when you rarely feel persecution, and by the way, why do you have such a problem with me having a problem?
I don't. I'm just curious about what's behind it.
I just feel I have to justify every feeling I have to you, Suzanne.
I'm not asking you to justify your feelings. They happened. They're valid. I would just like to understand why Jesus made you so uncomfortable.
Look, I don't know. Every time I see him up on a cross, suffering and bloody, I avert my eyes. When I checked into a hotel in Italy a little while ago, and there was a crucifix over the bed, I took it down.
You did?
Yeah, I didn't want to see a dead man who meant nothing to me hanging over my head. It was very disturbing.
Jesus meant nothing to you, Priscilla? I doubt that. He must have meant something if you went to the trouble of taking down the crucifix.
In the weeks following the crucifixion crisis, Priscilla realized that maybe Jesus was someone she needed to understand better. She watched the TV program about the last days of Jesus and compared it to what Suzanne had written for their book. Jesus stood for everything righteous, she realized. His mere presence on earth was incredibly powerful. The kindness and goodness that emanated from him were Christian in the best sense of the word. What a difference that made to her. At the next meeting, Priscilla told Suzanne and Rania about the TV program.
I said, I'm on a first-name basis with Jesus. It was a joke, but I really meant it. Jesus no longer scared me. I no longer felt like a bad Jew for finding his words and deeds fascinating to hear and something to learn from.
I've never felt threatened by Jesus. Muslims are taught that he is one of the most important prophets, immaculately conceived by the Virgin Mary. Priscilla had different feelings about Jesus, and they weren't good ones. I couldn't believe that she had once taken down the crucifix in a hotel room. I think Priscilla is hardwired to stay alert to anti-Semitism. She is constantly vigilant. I can understand how Suzanne felt entitled to tell her uncensored story of Jesus' life and death without fear of being labeled an anti-Semite. I know this feeling well. I fear being labeled an anti-Semite whenever I am critical of Israel.
Another confrontation was about to begin. Suzanne's Episcopal Church had been meeting at a temple. Her true feelings surfaced when Priscilla began to question her response to her children.
You know, Suzanne, I read what you wrote last week about the temple. You wrote that when your children called out, "That's our temple, Mommy," you didn't explain exactly what you felt when you passed the temple.
I'm not sure exactly what I felt.
Well, do you now?
Well, I think I didn't want to be identified as being the stereotype of a Jew.
There you go. What is the stereotype?
Well,
What would be so bad about being mistaken as a Jew?
I'm not sure.
If my children said, "That's our church," I would say, "No, honey, we're not Christian. We're Jews." But you felt something beyond that. What is it?
I don't know how to express it.
Look, relax, Suzanne. I don't think you're anti-Semitic, but if I'm going to be honest,
Confessed my experience, but she needed more.
She wouldn't want to be a Muslim either.
so Suzanne, what's the stereotype?
You know, I have Jewish friends too, Priscilla.
Yeah, some of my best friends are Jewish. So what's the stereotype?
All right. I guess it's someone who is pushy. And, well, someone who cares very much about money. And then there's that Woody Allen neuroticism.
Suzanne, 2 out of those 3 things justified the Holocaust. I rest my case.
What case?
I rest my case as to why Jews carry the Holocaust around with them. Why we are sometimes accused of being so obsessed with it. Because even enlightened, intelligent, kind Christians as yourself sit here and verbalize the stereotype of a Jew as being a pushy person who is obsessed with money.
That stereotype is multiplied by 100 for a Muslim today.
Okay, Rania, but we're not talking about you right now. These are the same words Hitler used. Pushy, aggressive, consumed with money. It all goes back to the money changes in the temple.
Well, maybe this illustrates the difference between Christianity and Judaism. In Christianity, there is a prejudice against wealth and materialism. Jesus said that it is easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. And there's another passage in which a wealthy man who follows all the commandments that Jesus had, Jesus tells him, and he asks what else he can do. And Jesus tells him, leave all your goods behind and follow me.
Well, I guess corrupt CEOs like Ken Lay must have missed that sermon. Listen, I can't quote scripture off the top of my head. Maybe Christians did have more guidance on the subject of materialism in the New Testament. But I can assure you that nowhere in the Torah does it say accumulate as much money as you can and screw your investors. I was raised by my parents to be very generous to those less fortunate than we were. And I have taught my children to do the same. You know, whenever there's a scandal on Wall Street, we Jews say, please, God, don't let it be a Jew. We're paranoid about the stereotypes of Jews obsessed with accumulating money. The fact that you know stereotypes exist doesn't make you bad, Suzanne, but you were embarrassed to say them. And those Jewish friends, who are they?
I knew a lot of Jewish people. I live in New York, after all. I grew up in a neighborhood with 3 or 4 Orthodox families on the block. I swam, played softball, and took ballet classes. But they were really friends. Why? In part because people, including me, gravitate towards others like ourselves. They're easier to understand.
They had survived an amazing confrontation and were exhausted. Rania was now ready to talk.
I know, Priscilla, that you are not interested in my view, but I feel like I'm fighting stereotypes every day. A mother hosting my daughter on a play date asked if Leia had any dietary restrictions. Another acquaintance recently asked to see my sister's wedding pictures. She thought she would be wearing ethnic regalia, but in fact, even my grandmother wore a white wedding dress.
Really?
When I meet someone new, I often feel I have to immediately sound smart and educated. That is why I was a student forever.
Is that the stereotype, that Islamic women are not educated?
Yes, that they don't go to school, that they don't know the worth of money, they buy 100 of the same dress in the same color, they are repressed by their husbands, covered up and controlled.
But that's such a stereotype. You're nothing like that.
Yes, but sometimes I wonder, Priscilla, whether you admire me for who I am, or because I defy some stereotype you might have.
So you're saying that I stereotype Muslim women?
I don't think Suzanne would like to be a Muslim either. Would you, Suzanne?
No, especially after 9/11. It would be very uncomfortable.
I think that before 9/11, Islam wasn't even on the radar of most Americans. No offense, Rania, but you are flattering yourself to think there was a stereotype of a Muslim.
That was the last straw for me. Talk about being banished. I had been sitting there, patiently struggling to make my voice heard, as Suzanne and Priscilla went at it in their so-called salient moment of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Forget Judeo-Christian Muslim tradition. I could not even get my stereotypes recognized. There were no Muslim stereotypes? You're kidding. What about the hijacking in the 80s, Pan Am Lockerbie? When Americans think of Islam, they think of terrorism, fanaticism, abused women, spoiled rich Arabs, a religion of the sword spread by the sword.
But when those planes hit the World Trade Center, the thought of Islam didn't even cross my mind.
Oh, it did mine.
I think prior to 9/11, people didn't think much about Muslims.
No. What about the images of fat oil sheiks with camels and harems spending lots of money?
I think you are hypersensitive to your own stereotype, Rania. Some would say you are a self-hating Muslim. People sometimes accuse me of being a self-hating Jew.
I strongly disagree. To be critical of a stereotype or aware of it is not to be self-hating. No matter where we go or who we become, we are still carpet sellers, out to swindle innocent non-Muslims. Most people don't associate Islam with positive scientific or cultural world contributions like Europe's Renaissance.
What do you mean?
Well, it was the Muslims who translated and preserved the Greek classics. Europe was reintroduced to these texts by Muslims. Muslims were great mathematicians. Few people know that algebra comes from the Arabic word al-jabar, and the maps and boats that were used to discover America were Muslims.
So let me get this straight. Christopher Columbus used the inventions of the Islamic community to discover America?
Absolutely. Ferdinand and Isabella used the know-how of centuries of Muslims, the inventors who had been there well before them. I think Muslims and Arabs are now the only groups in our society about women, about whom other people think they can make racial slurs and jokes without being labeled racists.
Remember when I invited you to join the book club discussion on the Middle East, Rania?
Yes.
I never told you that the Jewish woman who was scheduled to host that evening bowed out after she heard that you were coming.
You've got to be kidding. Why didn't you tell me that before?
Why, I didn't want to make you feel uncomfortable.
Can you imagine if you replaced Palestinian Muslim with African American or Asian? I dislike stereotypes so much. That's why I want to be empowered. That is what this project is about for me. Not about me belonging, but me saying I am proud of who I am. And I refuse to be plugged into a stereotype. Now, I want my voice to be heard.
Speak up, Rania.
As a Muslim, Priscilla, we feel that we are victims now.
Okay, I'll give that to you. You could be a victim.
Well, people may have difficulty thinking about Muslims as victims because now there are so many aggressors using the name of your religion.
I sensed how difficult my audience was going to be. I clearly had a lot of ground to cover. Muslims feel that in the West, Islam has been seen as an inherently violent religion that was unapologetically spread through the sword. Westerners seem to believe that Islam is inferior as a religion when they compare it to the message of Jesus Christ. Some in the West consider the modern violence committed in the name of Islam to be a modern manifestation of that religion, and consider Muhammad an epileptic and dismiss his visions. Others consider him a madman. Some Westerners consider Islam's holy scriptures to be plagiarized versions of Christian and Jewish texts, and consider Muslims barbaric, uncivilized, extreme, and unenlightened. Clearly, a few stereotypes will have to be shed before people can even begin to imagine talking about shared Christian, Judeo-Muslim tradition.
I feel personally that I am not a stereotype.
The overriding culture we are in is Christian. The whole world operates on a Christian calendar. We learn about Christians through osmosis. But what do Christians learn about us?
Oh, I agree, but why are you holding it against me?
Rania and I understand each other because we are minorities, right?
Well, explain the kinship that you have, the things that you feel that I don't, that make you feel different.
I think it's like a schoolyard where there are social outcasts. Then there's the popular crowd. The Christians are the popular crowd, and you're one of them.
Priscilla, do you feel that you cannot connect to me because I'm part of the majority?
You wouldn't understand.
How do you know that?
You're right, that's discrimination on my part.
Suzanne shared the times in her life when she had felt an outsider, feeling insecure and inferior to others. This was a side of her the others hadn't seen. She had always seemed so confident.
I never thought of you as an outsider.
Well, I was, or I am sometimes. Even though I'm Christian, I can connect with your feelings as a minority. But I do understand what you mean. You can't travel far in America without some message of Jesus assaulting you. Most of the propaganda is benign, but sometimes the message is a real turnoff. Do you really think I'm one of them?
No, in fact, you're right, Suzanne. I have been stereotyping you.
Rania was feeling that Muslims were being stereotyped too.
I'm afraid I'll be judged by whether I cover my hair, what I wear, or how I pray. I had been married in a mosque, but it was too conservative for me. I wanted a mosque in which my American family would not feel foreign. I needed a mosque, not only for myself, but for my 4-year-old son. I craved for him a setting similar to Sunday school or Hebrew school that you have described. One of the problems with Islam in America is that it has become a voice for the disaffected.
If Rania wasn't finding that education in her own tradition, I wondered if my church might be sort of a foster home for her and her children. Her family accepted my invitation to attend services there.
I focused on the beauty of the service, enjoying the God that unites us. Then came Holy Communion. My Muslim understanding of Jesus as human made me feel separated from those who were lining up to take bread.
They just ask non-Christians not to step forward to receive communion.
And that moment of communion is awkward for Jews too, Rania.
Yes, that's when I felt my Muslim identity assert itself.
And what does it mean to you to be Jewish, Priscilla?
Well, it's like a tribal thing.
I've heard that before, and I don't understand it.
It's an expression that Jews use, M-O-T, member of the tribe.
So it's a loyalty to ancestors.
Yes, and for me, it's primarily to my father. He was the one who insisted we go to temple, and it is there I feel my father's presence in the very best way. Don't you feel that kind of connection to your faith, Rania?
Not at all. My tribe today is the American tribe. Islam allows anyone to become a Muslim simply by saying the testimony of faith. I believe that there is one God and that his prophet is Muhammad. It has nothing to do with a blood connection. People can come and go from Islam as they please. There is no tradition of baptism or confirmation. It's pretty much between you and God. The God I know through Islam recognizes Jesus, Moses, and the prophets before him.
Christians recognize Jesus and Moses and the prophets before him.
My issue with Christianity is the concept of the Trinity.
As they continued their discussion, they were not only talking about their three different religions, but they were also talking about three personal and entirely different relationships with their own religions. At that time, Rania told Priscilla and Suzanne that she often felt that she had faith but no religion, that Priscilla had religion but no faith, and that Suzanne had both.
Why are you Christian, Suzanne?
Because I'm a follower of Jesus. He was a better role model than the prophets of the Old Testament and Muhammad. He was the perfect example of love, charity, and humanity, as opposed to Jesus' divinity that makes him a role model. Excuse me. He was a perfect example of love, charity, and humility, unlike Moses and Muhammad, who were both flawed men.
Muhammad made no claims to be perfect. It is specifically Muhammad's accessible humanity, as opposed to Jesus' divinity, that makes him a role model.
Jesus' role on earth was very different from Muhammad. If we all behaved the way Jesus did, there would be a lot more peace on earth.
I can see why you admire Jesus so much. But I think that Christianity today is a better religion because it's had time to evolve. It has been the dominant religion in places where there is free speech and civil liberties. That's a huge advantage, especially when you contrast it to Islam, which is predominantly a religion of the developing world.
And where do you find hope, Rania?
Whenever I need affirmation, I look around to the stars, the moon above. Islam seeks to provide evidence in the wonder of nature. It's not simply faith in your heart. The Islamic way is to question, consider, think, reflect, and you should come out a believer. I hang on to the idea of God because the alternative seems so futile. I need to believe in a higher order. In fact, the more that science unravels about the wonders of life, the more I am in awe of it. It offers proof of God.
They discussed a universal God, the Jewish God, equally accessible and available to all. The most important thing they learned was that their religion each had essentially the same message.
The greatest of the commands is this: to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself.
What is hateful to you, do not do unto others.
None of you is a believer until you love for your neighbor what you love for yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This time, we'd like to entertain discussion. And you know what, Steve? Why don't we sit? We'll get 2 chairs here, and then we'll all be there.
Notice all the kids left.
Where'd they go?
Bell rang. Next message.
Well, you know, at least they know about this book. And maybe it's a beginning, maybe we planted the seed. I'm very proud that we are doing this, that this book was turned into a script that could be presented in this way. And to hear the message that was presented by the 3 authors here. I'll just read their names again. Rania Idlibi, Suzanne Oliver, Priscilla Warner. And they were very gracious to provide an opportunity for Nancy Bell and Jean Brian McClure to adapt it and present it in this way, and for our cast to present this now. And I believe that there's an encouragement to form a faith club for different communities to do that. And maybe in the meantime, just having an interfaith outreach is very important, especially in these times where there's suspicion and concern, and the very things that were raised up in the dialogue of the script. I'm going to give you a little background from myself there, and my interest in interfaith work. And when I was living in the Tampa Bay area, I attended a trialogue of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim clerics. There was a panel discussion, and they were talking about their religions, and it turned into an argument on stage. And I was thinking, what would work? What if the Messiah were to show up? Would any of us realize it? And one of the things that occurred to me was story. That might be a way for people to encounter another faith. And so that led to, I remember my dentist was Muslim. And I remember him talking and saying, you know, since 9/11 I've been taking my faith so seriously. And I'm sure that there's common ground. What do you think? Whatever you say, God. Well, actually, that led to an idea of putting together an evening of sacred storytelling, in which, through my dentist, I encountered. He was not an imam. He was though a speaker in his community. Mamdouh El Said and Emily Harris, who was a Jewish storyteller. And so the 3 of us put together a series of evenings of sacred storytelling. And eventually, Mamdouh moved on, and then it was Imam Wilmore Siddiqui, a black Muslim, who became part of our group. We did several programs again on various themes, but drawing from our traditions. And at that point, then I moved up to the Villages area. We did do a program at my church, but then there was an incident in Gainesville where a minister threatened to burn Korans. And so the word went out, encouraging churches to invite someone of another faith to read their scripture in a service. And that was in the summertime. And so then I had met Imam Abdurrahman Sykes at that point, and Sheldon Skrull, a Jewish friend, and the three of us put together a service. We met and talked about this, that each of us would do scripture and also to speak. And you know, I actually had some pushback about, you mean you're going to have a Muslim speak in your sanctuary? And man, we went ahead with it. And I'll tell you what came of that. Now, with Protestant Christianity, there's a lot of flexibility with worship. In Judaism, there's a very specific worship. In Islam, there's specific ways of doing prayer. There really, and even with Orthodox and Roman Catholic Christianity, there are very specific ways of worshiping. But with Protestant Christianity, we had the flexibility of the form. And so what we actually did was we were able to weave in elements of our religious traditions. And so we would do the barku, we did there was playing of the shofar. And Phil Glazer is he's the rock star of shofar. And he sounds the shofar, and it's like Johnny Mathis singing Maria. It's like 15 minutes later, you know, we just, so it's amazing. And then Sheldon did the barku, and then Imam Sykes did the adha. And for us to do these, to hear this in a Christian sanctuary, all of a sudden you hear the beauty of that tradition. You don't have to know the words to know that it's sacred. And that's actually something, I'm trying to think of the poet who spoke about this. But the idea that you don't necessarily have to know the words to know the intention intuitively. And then we each shared. There were also prayers, and we did our the Christians. So we had our Trinitarian doxology and Gloria Patri, but that was woven in with other prayers, allowing our Jewish and Muslim guests to authentically pray, and that was according to their tradition. So one of the key things about interfaith is you got to be who you are, but you also got to make room for other groups to be who they are, and respect that tradition. That, in a sense, these are incompatible traditions, but they share the same spirit. Same spirit, and there is a sense of wholeness that people experience when you do something like this. But again, it's not becoming one thing or another. It's being who you are and working together. And that these things work. And my hope is your community will do some experimenting like we've done, and like this program here. I've done a lot of speaking here. What questions do you have of us?
Mine's not a question, but I do want to thank you. I read the book many years ago, and you brought it up to life for me, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I'd like to just share that I probably have an advantage over a lot of people here in that I come from a very ecumenical family. Within my immediate family, it's a Jewish, Catholic, Mormon, Unitarian, and probably a couple of others.
Quite different almost.
I have all the holidays covered.
So, no, but the point is, I learned very early in life that I learned that while that God is universal, is also unknowable in an absolute sense. That religions are, I look at as pathways to enable people to approach the divine, but the divine, in final analysis, is unknowable, and that different people, we understand truths with a little t. We're incapable of really comprehending truth with a capital T. We all have pieces of truth, and some are more useful than others. But people that feel threatened by people who believe differently are essentially demonstrating their own lack of faith rather than their faith in the beliefs that they have. They feel that if they don't know everything, they don't know anything, whereas it's important to realize that you hang on to the truth that you know, and you'll get there. It isn't important that everyone be on the same path that you are.
Thank you. Thank you. That's true. Thank you. Sandy?
I just wanted to share, I was just caught by this. There's a Hindu proverb that says, there are many paths around the mountain. Everybody gets to the top, except for the fool that goes around telling everybody else they're on the wrong path.
I wondered what it was like for each of you who have your own sense, who you are, reading the part of somebody else. What was it like for you to speak some of the words? How much did they really connect with your own authentic truth as individual women?
Initially, it was a little difficult for me. Number one, I'm not Palestinian. I'm South African. The accent didn't give me away, I know. Number two, the original Rania did not wear the hijab. And so I didn't come on board initially for that reason. There were two actresses prior to me doing this. And also mentioning that I didn't pray like traditional Muslims do. So I had a lot of struggles going on within me. But I'm doing, the reason I'm doing it is for the larger picture. It's not about me, and I have my own journey. And Rania has her own journey, as everybody else here has theirs. So I had to come to grips with myself and say, you know what? You are extending a hand to other people and forget where you are.
And as Duran, I am not Catholic. Never have been. But however, I have to, I'd like to share with you that working with Phyllis and Naren, I've learned a lot. And that's like trying to get around the mountain, whatever, I'm still on my own path, but I certainly recognize and respect the paths of others. And I think that's grown in me throughout this.
Thank you.
Well, I am Jewish. Have been Jewish all my life. But very similar to Priscilla, grew up in New York City, Queens, New York, and never experienced any anti-Semitism really, because I always were in the Jewish, big groups, it was a Jewish, Italian, friends, and never dated a non-Jewish boy. Most of my friends were Jewish, went to Jewish camps. But so I never really experienced any anti-Semitism. And then we came to Central Florida, where people didn't know what a Jew really was. Went to the villages, my neighbors never met a Jew. And I said, what do you mean, never met a Jew? And they said, we never knew any Jews. And Steve and I kind of taught them what being Jewish is all about. I've had people over my home for holidays. Naren and her husband shared with us the Passover one year. I had an interfaith Passover, and it's exciting getting to know more about the Islamic religion. And, you know, this faith club has been around for many years. Many things have happened since then. And, you know, horrors that happened. And now that those horrors have occurred, and I know more about the Islamic religion and about Muslims, I can like separate that person and not look at it as a whole. Because, and even, you know, even in Charlottesville, Virginia, when they were marching and they were saying about the Jews, you know, you have to separate those people. Those are just a minority. And that minority is not going to win. And that's what we have to learn, that these minorities are ignorant fools. That we have to learn more about each other and to know that everybody is equal and that how important it is to live in a society as equals. So, thank you.
Please.
I think the attitude of anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim, hi Sandy, how are you? So much of it comes out of fear and the unknown. I think that's obvious to anybody that has a brain. But they're not aware that they're ignorant. They think that they're in the majority, that they know and believe what their anti-Semitism is, when really they're weak, but they don't know it. And it's that evil of ignorance that blocks so much of this in the world. If we could eliminate that, and it isn't just the Jews or the Muslims, Christians are not real good people either. The Klan and all of the Holocaust, they hold this belief that is so strong and absolute to them, they don't give way to anybody else's feelings. And you don't have to agree with them, but you have to respect them. How often is that said? And if you respect them, you're going to find some darn good people. But you got to open up and...
I have a question for Naran. The biggest thing that I don't understand, well, maybe not the biggest, but the biggest one that comes up now about Islam is the way some people freak out about someone who wants to draw a picture of your prophet. I mean, Christian art, we have Jesus all over the place, and we see God as sort of like King Neptune, and it doesn't bother us. But when that French newspaper had cartoons, I know they weren't in good taste, it just enraged so many Muslims, and I don't understand why.
The question can be for me, and we have a scholar that could answer that. I'm going to say that as Muslims, we do not have pictures in our home at all of people. And so our prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, did not want pictures for that reason, because he did not want to be worshipped. Only God in our faith is worshipped. And so we find it kind of troubling that somebody would depict a picture of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, when they really and truly, I don't think they know what he looked like anyhow. But because we don't have pictures, we believe that on the day of judgment we are to blow breath into a picture or a three-dimensional object, and that's really, really troubling. And so this would be part of the reason why Muslims do not want pictures of our Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, out there. Imam Shadi, do you have anything to add to that?
Sorry, I had appointment, so I came late. Actually, as my sister just said, in the Muslim nation, we don't have specific image for Prophet Muhammad, and it's forbidden, not only for him, to have a picture for any messengers.
Just two things. I read the book when it first came out a number of years ago, and the thing that really impressed me also was the fact that each of these women not only learned about each other's faith, but their own faiths became much richer and deeper. And as a Christian, I recall it happening to Suzanne. She really went back into her faith. So that's also a benefit that we receive when we get together as people of different faiths, if we might say. The other thing, we Christians, there are different varieties. And what I'm dealing with now, we hear about evangelical Christians, and I happen to be a Christian of the Lutheran bent. And then, of course, we have several of those that are
That are just as bad as the other one.
well, you know, so right now what I am dealing with in my own self is that when someone finds out you're a Christian, right away they're wondering, okay, what variety are you? And I am not going to say anything negative about my evangelical brothers and sisters, that because they are where they are at in their faith journey. As, for one of a better term, a liberal Christian, I am in my own faith journey. And I find the older I get, the less dogmatic I am in many ways. And so I just wanted to say that we as Christians also have our own struggle. And also people looking at you, oh, you're Christian, so you must be this way, because that's what they're hearing out there.
That's dominant.
I think that in all religions there are people that worship the divine and people who think by worshiping their religion it's the same thing. I have no problem at all talking with people of other faiths who truly worship the divine, but there are Jews, Christians, Muslims, probably all religions who are so insecure, really, in my opinion, in their own faith that they feel they have to worship the religion because I think they don't realize that it's really a blasphemy rather than a demonstration of faith to substitute religion for the divine.
May I say something?
I've come across pictures of Jewish women dressed, covered up, similar way that I am. And of course, not to mention the nuns also, they're supposed to be dressed the same way. And I always thought it was nice and amazing that we have so much in common, right? Different religions, right, and dressed the same way. And I just want to hear your opinion about that. What do you think of that dress and of the Jewish woman dressed that way? And what does it mean, I guess, to the Jewish people? And same thing for the nuns.
Well, Christians, when my mother went to church, Christian women always wore hats to church. I mean, that was just, you just didn't go without a hat in my mother's day.
I come from a Catholic background. My mother, they called it in South Africa a mantilla. It was like a lace, and they covered their hair. So
It's not just the Jewish religion, well, a Catholic would never go in church without something on their head.
My mother had is famous for her hat.
You know, it was just something that, you know, and I think all of us wore hats. I don't ever remember going to church without a hat on.
Well, it's in the Eastern tradition, covering the head is a sign of respect to God, rather than, so that's where that, but specifically for women, I think it's partly because of the fact that all of our religions were so in the form of, dominant male leadership, and so this was a sign of submission. Also, it was I think in one way it was a recognition that it would be better if men, one of my mottos is to avoid sin, avoid temptation, and essentially men understood that seeing very attractive women was a temptation that they would rather not have to worry about, and therefore the traditional dress for the women was very modest and not emphasizing any sexual arousal, and it was as much to protect the women as to protect their own.
That's only practiced in the Orthodox practice of the Jewish religion.
More than Orthodox.
And then there's the Eastern European sect, Hasidic, which you've seen with the payas and the black. The women also are covered in dresses. Their skin is not usually visible. But in the more liberalized practices of Judaism, conservative and reformed, which my wife and I are reformed, it's very much liberalized, so that clothing is not a restriction.
I struggle with it. I struggle with it. I come from a tradition where women, originally where women couldn't be faith leaders, and I am a faith leader now in the Episcopal Church. I'm a priest. And so when I got to know Nuran for the first time, it was setting off all kind of buttons in me, and so I'm still on a journey with it. And I think partly what I've had to do is own that for myself. That is my struggle with my experience of the, patriarchy that has infected and affected my life, and own it for myself. And I'm still
prophets, because as he just mentioned, you don't have the clear image about that person. And in the meantime, that prophet, he did his part. Now you are connecting with God immediately. Nobody can be in the middle between you and the God. So actually, as in Muslim religion, we don't put Prophet Muhammad as, between us and him and Allah and God. So we pray to God immediately. Yes, we send salutation for him, but he's not the God, he's not the Son of God, he's a prophet and he's a human being. So since I don't know his exact image, because, the point is, if you read the history of the Arab nations, the idols they used to worship, those idols used to be righteous men. So Satan came to them, okay, what do you think if you can create a idol or a shape for that person just to remember him? This is the first step. Generation after generation, they started worshiping those idols. So we don't like to reach that point. Okay, make sense?
Yes.
Imam Shadi is local here.
Yeah,
Here.
Imam at Center.
And he's also been active, along with Sandy Arnold, been active with, in the Villages area with a interfaith prayer partners, and Nuran and Imam Sykes, anybody else here. We've been doing a quarterly prayer service. We just did one last week, and we're going to be doing a community Thanksgiving interfaith service at United Church of Christ in the Villages this Thursday at 7 o'clock. You all come. But we've been doing this program now. It's been like a year and a half, I believe.
Yes.
And so every three months we've been doing these events, and been very well received. And this would be something again I'm hoping that your community will do.
So
Sandy.
I do just sort of like, this is a spoiler alert, but our board, at our next board meeting for Interfaith Lake County, we are talking about replicating the Peace Prayer Partner, I'm sorry, the Peace Prayer Partner service. We're looking at Mount Dora as a venue.
I'd like to say a very special thank you to the participants, because you certainly were outstanding. I mean, the way you read it with meaning and your expressions just helped me to enjoy it so much better. And I think civil discussions like this are very important, as it helps us to build a better understanding and a better way to live together and to embrace diversity and inclusion. As a matter of fact, I'd just like to share a couple of experiences with you. I served as the CEO of a hospital, and it was a state psychiatric hospital. And we had a Christmas tree on the lawn. The rabbi came by, who was one of the chaplains on the staff, and said to me, "I'd like to put a menorah and have service and light a candle each day." And I said, "That's fine." I said, "Do you need any help in getting that done?" Then later on I was told, "Oh, you're going to get in trouble by doing that." And my response was, "I don't worry about getting in trouble doing that, and I don't think I'll get in trouble. If I have a Christmas tree out there, why can't we put a menorah out there?"
Amen.
And I guess that came from my training in the military, because in the military we used one facility for our Muslim worship, for our Jewish worship service, for our Christian worship service, and we learned to live and work together. As a matter of fact, I went to a Hanukkah party that was held by the Jewish service, and I won first place for the questions that they and I thought that was very I liked that. As a matter of fact, my wife and I, we've attended so many bar mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs that I guess people think we're Jewish. But I think that this is very good, and I commend the United Church of Christ and all who's presenting these type discussions, because I think that's very important for us all to gain a better understanding of. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Breaking down barriers.
I don't want to step a little on a low note here, but I have, as I've gotten older, I've gotten more sympathy for people who are driven by prejudices and hates and fears who plan another type of thing, because one of my experiences was finally facing my own prejudices. I think it's impossible for anybody to grow up without having ingrained within them accepted stereotypes and prejudices that are prevalent in the society in which they grow up. It's why most of us are the religion we are, because that's the way our parents were. I mean, it is the question that one thing is obviously better than the other, but there are these things that are part of us, and I think the people here realize that there's something more that we all have in common than separate us, but that we all have within us prejudices and preconceived ideas of other people, and until we face them within ourselves, we're unable to appreciate the common humanity that unites all of us.
Thank you.
I think, and you're gonna have the right saying here, but one of the things that we've talked about is that when you know someone, it's far different.
It makes a
It
difference.
makes a huge difference than whatever you're saying about a group. Suddenly you know a Muslim person, Muslim woman, which I think is actually more important because we do have so many more preconceived notions about Muslim, a Jewish woman, Jewish faith, and all of a sudden there's a face to that prejudice. There's a face, and I think it begins to erode a little bit some of your prejudice. And I think that's what's so important about this is
Well, a lot of prejudice comes from hearsay.
yeah. You find out,
You know, we grew up in an era when my parents, blacks, our parents didn't see living next to a black person and you grow up like that and you have that preconceived notion. But then, it's like anything else. You want to continue doing that or you want to turn around and make it a better thing, And I think that's what our generation has tried to do with our children. And, my children grew up in a neighborhood, my house was a United Nations. We had, our children had friends from whenever, whoever.
Well, but if you
didn't
were,
matter.
but if you were in New York, I mean, I can remember growing up back, well, too far back anyway. I remember Pearl Harbor. But the point was that New York was more segregated than Florida. I did not have a black person in my school until I was in college. All right? And because the neighborhoods were so strictly segregated that, and then they had neighborhood schools. Well, that was just an excuse, so that, there were none of us that weren't exposed to extreme prejudice or prejudicial ideas as we grew up, and it's inevitable that it takes an effort. It takes an effort. You smile, you greet people, it's getting to know people that breaks this down. The theory only can go so far until you actually meet people and talk to people and exchange what you have in common with them.
We just saw the movie Suburbicon. I don't know if anybody saw it. But one of the stories in it is a black family moving out to the suburbs and what transpires. And it's a horrible, horrible thing, but that's what it was in those days in the 50s.
I did want to mention that I said that about the connection with Rania. I didn't connect on those things, but the other things that we talked about when I got really emotional, I was very, very connected as far as being never feeling comfortable walking into a crowd, always being an outcast. I play sport, and when I walk into a place for the first time, as a matter of fact, this just happened 2 months ago. Somebody had called me and asked me if I would play in a pickleball tournament. And I said, sure, I would. I checked with my husband and we weren't doing anything on that Saturday. And I arrived at the Orlando Volleyball Center. And I said, well, hello, I'm here to sign up for the tournament. And for about 30 seconds, there were 3 people behind the desk. This is what I got. They didn't pick up their pens, they just stared at me like I had 3 heads, not just a head covered with hijab. And I beg your pardon?
It was because you were a woman.
So anyway, I went there and I played, and I was the only woman that made it through to the finals, and I came out with a silver, and they had to take pictures of me. Yeah. They had to take pictures, and they have to put it up on their wall. There's a Muslim woman that came in second with a silver. So, you know, I've got to defy those stereotypes. But as far as being Rania in this, I connected with her absolutely on that level.
I would just like to say something as the, is this on?
Yep.
As the narrator, for me, over the last number of years, it's a part that I feel very comfortable with because I don't get to say much, and so it's like being at home. However,
Your level of,
However, for me, I get to watch these women each time they perform, and they always bring another level to it, and they speak with such emotion. For me, I identify because, especially with the part my wife plays, I myself have never been the most religious person, but I gained a sense of spirituality from this, which is important. I definitely identify with the anti-Semitism. I've always been very sensitive to that. I've experienced it. I've experienced it in the workplace. I've experienced it. I had an opportunity, and I made sure that I was in Skokie, Illinois back in 1978 when I had an opportunity. And recently, on a trip my wife and I were on, I made it my business to be in Charlottesville. I just felt that I had to be there. And I found it very, very important to me. I needed to make that journey. But on a lighter note, I would just like to tell a funny story about a stereotype. A while back, it had always been a dream of mine to go to Israel. And my wife never really felt that it was important enough to her that she would want to participate, but we had an opportunity. And she conceded. She says, would you like to go? And I said yes. The rabbi in St. Augustine, who we were familiar with, is having a trip, so we sent our money in. And no sooner had we paid for the trip than she says, oh, by the way, this has always been a dream of yours. I've always wanted a motorhome. Well, I really couldn't argue with that because, you know, it wasn't too bad. So we got into that whole way of life. And the first night that I brought the motorhome to the house, it was in the driveway, when a friend of ours, who is probably the most liberal person, but you would never know it from looking at him again, if you looked at a person and tried to identify who he was. And he came running up to me and he said, what are you doing with a motorhome in your driveway? Jews don't camp. And therein lies the stereotype. And I immediately answered him and I said, you're wrong. We invented camping. I mean, think about it, 40 years in the desert, that came an awful lot of times. But I was so taken back by the, maybe there's some truth to this. That night I went on Google and I Googled Jewish RV groups. And sure enough, there's a group called Chai, which means life, health, and they are a Jewish RV group. And they were having a rally over Passover in Las Vegas. And I said to Phyllis, this is our kind of group. But it's just funny how stereotypes do develop, and we try not to live with them. But this has been an important journey to me, to be here. At some points I have felt that it is losing some of its importance. But the one thing that I have always spoken to my children about, I said, always safeguard, because history has a way of coming back. And today, more than ever, we have to be careful, because we see the roots right there. And if we don't handle it properly, it'll overwhelm us. And so this has just taken on a whole new level of importance and significance. Thanks.
So Phyllis and Steve, can you be comforted in the fact that I think it was Pope John 23rd that finally forgave the Jews for killing Jesus? He made a proclamation. It was either him or John Paul, I'm not sure which. So,
I'm not sure if that was forgive. It was the well.
It was a readjustment of the, it says that was an incorrect way of understanding the situation. It wasn't a question of, they did it, but we forgive them. That was not what it was. It was a question of, that's the wrong way to interpret the.
And that's something that I heard all of my life growing up, you know.
There was something with, in the United Church of Christ in the mid-'80s, basically, there was actually a resolution to recognize Judaism as a sister religion, as a fellow religion, that we were not obligated to convert. So I think it's a very similar thing to what the Vatican II and John Paul XXIII. I'm not sure about the specific wording of that. But that's, I think, a step in the right direction. Recognizing our fellowship.
We need to honor that in one another, the women that we are. So I'm glad you asked the question, because to me it's often the elephant in the room. It's like, well, yeah, but hey, how can you do this, And you're a very empowered woman, Joanne, and that spoke to me so much when I first met you. And I'm like, well, there's something I don't get here, and I'm learning. I want to learn. So thank you for that question.
I just want to say, I have almost an opposite reaction from Amanda. I find it heartwarming, beautiful, inspiring, and another call to worship. To me, when I see other people practicing and showing signs and wearing or behaving in a way that honors their religion, I find it always moving for me, whether it's my religion or not. So I have inspiration from the hijab, or from the skull cap, or from any scarf that women wear. I think it's wonderful for people to practice and wear and show their religion. I like it.
Just something I'd like to offer at this point, as we're closing our time. And they talk about the war on Christmas, all that happy holidays and this kind of thing, and how bland that is. Well, maybe one thing we ought to try to do is we ought to figure out what the tradition is of the person that we encounter. And rather than just say Merry Christmas, say Happy Hanukkah, or Happy Eid, or Happy, in the context of who they are, to offer that greeting. And that would be, for us Christians, that would be a Christian thing to do. But the idea is that you help people to be who they're going to be, and you be who you are.
Yeah, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with people saying Merry Christmas to me and not knowing what I celebrate. And I don't say anything specific to another person. If I don't know, I would say Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, have a good, healthy year. I just feel that Happy Holidays is great. What's wrong with Happy Holidays? But if you know the person is celebrating specifics, absolutely. Absolutely.
May I? Yes. In fact, maybe Drew can talk about this. One thing that
that hit me at the end of the service the other night was that there's a group of young people there now, interfaith group. And I was so glad to see that, because I think we were talking about how we grew up and, the segregation that was happening at that time. And maybe, what do you know? Tell us more about that.
That was actually, Imam Shadi could probably speak to that, because his son was part of that group. And it was, I believe it was David O'Brien? Who led that?
Which one?
The teenager interfaith prayer event.
Yeah, we had 1 month ago, and then I think we are going to have one in April again.
A retreat.
I just saw that service.
The kid, there was an event, a retreat that brought young people together from different faiths, and then they participated in our interfaith prayer service, and each offered up their prayers in the context of who they were in their faith.
David, he's the one who...
David O'Brien.
Yeah, I was impressed. I was and happy to see.
It was amazing. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
it was very good.
Shall we conclude by standing if you're still able? And about a moment of silence and address God, and however is your tradition. And let the people say, Amen.